Hey there, beautiful souls. Welcome to the Sacred Soul Shift series. I'm your host, Vanessa, your trusted soul navigator and energy alchemist. In this series, we'll embark on soul stirring adventures through the realms of intuition and self healing with women across all modalities, where ancient wisdom and modern insights intertwine. So, if you're tired of the scripted routine and ready for healing and growth, my kindred spirit, this series is crafted just for you. It's time for your Sacred Soul Shift. This morning I am here with beautiful Stacey B. We are here to discuss some fun and exciting things on her journey. Let me just go through her little bio snippet for you. Stacey B is a super smart, highly sensitive creative with a touch of trauma. Love that. Don't we all have a touch of trauma? Who openly discusses the healing journey she undertook so she could live her destiny, not her fate. She uses her successes and failures to create tools that support others that want the same. We all want the same. She's a storyteller, educator, and soul excavator, and she has a beautiful book out called Out Your Ego. Ready to hear all about that one? Let's bring her in. So, you have a beautiful book called Out Your Ego. We're going to get into that in a second, but I just want to know, I do this with all my guests. I love hearing the pre-stories. What got you to where you are now, and what do you do now? What came of the before to get you to where you are now, and what got you to actually the point of writing the book? I'd love to hear your story.
In a nutshell, a lot of suffering.
Mm-hmm.
That is what was the impetus. I don't know why it is, but human beings seem to be motivated more by pain than they are by joy.
I hear you.
We want to get away from the pain more than we want to go toward the joy. And logically, it makes no sense. But I think most of us are wired that way, for better or for worse. And so it was a lot of living a life that was a mosaic of trauma responses without having that language. Because the whole trauma complex PTSD movement has really only started in the last 5 to 10 years. Those were not words that were used in anybody's vocabulary. And so, I did a lot of screwed up things and had a lot of screwed up relationships, but they all brought me here.
Yeah, love that. And it's such a thing too when you're in that moment that you don't really understand what's happening until you're out of that moment. Do you feel that's what happened for you?
Oh, absolutely. I look back on who I was at different moments in my life, and I don't even recognize her.
Yeah, it's so
I don't even
true.
know her. And obviously it's still a part, she is still a part of me, but I have learned how to love myself in spite of all of the crap I put myself through, and I think we can judge ourselves so harshly. So many times we don't know how to give ourselves the space and grace that is needed to process things that we've moved away from. I think we can often be afraid that the feelings will overwhelm us and we'll drown in them. So it's easier just to, go find a new job if it was a toxic work environment, or jump into a new relationship, or drink, or smoke, or pop pills, or screw, or whatever, than to deal with the feelings.
So true. We suppress everything.
Yeah. And it wasn't until I really made a commitment after my first 2 go-rounds at therapy to really know that I could sit with it and survive.
Yeah. Wow. I love that. And I think it's a human trait that we tend to just skip forward, forget, move on straight away without dealing with the issue at its
but it lives in us.
Cause, right? Yeah.
It lives in our body. It lives in our nervous system. And I've known this for 20 some years. And I joke all the time, I love when science catches up with the truth.
Yeah.
Because this is what's happening. I think people are really coming to understand that there is a connection there. And you can compartmentalize it mentally, but as Bessel van der Kolk says, who literally wrote the book, The Body Keeps the Score, your body doesn't forget.
Yep. So true. And I think that's the same with a lot of spiritual practices, that there has been scientific works and studies and all that sort of stuff done in the past, yet they're still not accepting that it does stuff. But they are slowly catching up, that everything is intertwined, and it helps on so many different levels.
It really
doing
does.
all the work.
It does. Well, because it's a lot of work, and I think that there's still a propensity for people who want to be on some kind of spiritual path to think that it's a light switch. I want to be enlightened. I want to be spiritual, and I can just flick it. No, that is not how it works.
No.
And you wouldn't expect to go to the gym and a week later walk out looking like a supermodel, right?
I expect that, to be honest.
Well, I'm sorry for your disappointment. Because that is not how it works.
No. And it's funny when you start getting into spiritual stuff that you come to realize, like, you start doing things and you're like, I know this. And the more you get into and the more you uncover your own layers and the spiritual realm and all the things, the more that you realize that how much you don't know and how much there is more to learn and uncover. It's not just a one thing fits everyone, and it's not just a one tool makes everything better. It's a constant work, and every day it brings new imbalances and everything into your system. So it's not like you can just balance your system and you're good to go for the next 50 years. Everything is influencing us. Everything's creating shifting and movement in our bodies and in our mind. And it's a constant, it's not a battle, but it's a constant need to rebalance and uncover the truths and work on ourselves, right? It's never done. The work's
and you need a toolkit. And I mean, I have dozens and dozens of tools in my toolkit. And, you don't want to use a hammer when you need a screwdriver.
Exactly.
And sometimes, I mean, if you're teetering on some type of anxiety situation, meditation is probably not the right tool to pull out of the kit.
Yeah.
You probably need some deep breathing, or like we were talking about before we started, that birds chirping,
Yes.
calms your nervous system, or some EFT tapping. I mean, there are tools that work for each situation. And you only get to know that the more you play with them.
So true. I always say that meditation is the key to everything, but not everyone loves meditating. Not everyone enjoys it. And there's not just one way to do one thing, right? You can walk while you're meditating. You can sit, you can move, you can dance, you can do yoga. There's not one thing that fits every single person. And if you do one thing and it doesn't work for you, it's okay. Just move on, try something else.
Exactly. Because you don't need to be sitting in full lotus like this, chanting Om to meditate. I'll never forget my brother talking about how he loved going out for a motorcycle ride early on a Saturday morning through the woods, that was near his house, and it was quiet and blah, blah, blah. And, my mother, being a mom, was like, is he wearing a helmet? Is he going to hurt himself? But then she realized one day and she said, that's how he meditates.
Yeah. It's just chill out zone. Love that.
Well, because meditation is focus. And when you're on a motorcycle, if you're not focusing, you're in danger.
Yeah.
Karate is a meditation because you can hurt yourself if you're not focused. And, I think that's such an important point to make, because there is no one path. There is no one way. And, what I think, at least for me, when I was first starting out, I was seeking all the outside help. Course in Miracles, Joseph Campbell. I mean, I can't even name all of the different things that I looked into in the beginning, and they all provided something for me in the end, which was use the tools that you put in your toolkit and trust that the answers are inside.
Yeah. Ultimately, what it comes down to, everything is already inside of us. We just need help to see that and to unlock that.
Absolutely. And maybe get through some of the wall of white noise, or maybe peel back a layer that you've had some resistance to. But it's a very, very personal journey.
Yeah, it is. Love that. Just while we're on that topic, in your little bio, I just want to touch on this because this is something that I talk about as well, but it's not necessarily something I hear a lot. You want to live out your destiny, not your fate. I want to hear in your words the difference between what you consider destiny and fate? Because a lot of people, when I say something like that, they're like, it's the same thing.
Oh,
No, it's not.
no, not at all. Well, and I've been a professional writer for 20 some years. Language is my life,
Mhm.
So I am all about the nuances, both energetically and in meaning with words. And I think they're two completely different things. To me, your fate is what you came to believe you could have based on the lens that was built for you growing up.
Mhm.
Your family, teachers, whatever other authority figures were in your life that helped to create the lens through which you look at life without any conscious awareness of being a soul inside a body, as opposed
Yeah.
to the body and the human being aspect coming first. To me, destiny is when you're able to drop all that crap, and you've done and are doing the work to let go of the things that you've told yourself about who you are that have nothing to do with who you are, that you can begin to understand what your destiny looks like.
Love
And
that.
again, that's different for everybody.
Yeah, it's more of a soul journey rather than, what we're brought up to conceive our life should be like.
Absolutely. And I think
Yeah.
it's a very important distinction. Again, people want to think it's the same thing. Okay, that's a choice. We all make them every day,
Yeah.
but for me, they're different.
Yeah. So true. I think they're different too, and I think it comes down to um, obviously how I don't want to use the word awakened, but how awakened you are to other forces and energy moving for you, and
Hmm.
yeah,
Yeah,
definitely,
most
yeah,
definitely.
it's a shift. hmm So tell me how the book came about. What led you to wanting to tell the story in the book?
Well, it's actually, I think it's an interesting story, but it's my story, so of course, hopefully I do.
The story's
I
interesting.
had just gotten out of the same relationship for the third time.
hmm
And I was driving across a bridge in Florida, and I'm asking myself, what in the hell is wrong with you? What made you go back to this same relationship, which was not healthy in so many ways, a third time? And I very clearly heard in my being, because you believe you're a victim. Well, that's not what you want to hear from your intuition, right? I mean, that is not what you want to hear. And it stung. I'm not going to lie, it
hmm
stung. But I went home that night and I started thinking about it. And before I knew it, I had like a couple of dozen word pairs of what your life looks like when believing you're a victim is in charge, and what your life looks like when who you really truly are, your spiritual center, is in charge. So I dove in with both feet. And the book was originally a deck of cards.
Oh wow.
So I did like 24 of them and I laminated them myself and whatever. And I got a bunch of different people and made coffee dates to go kind of do a beta test. So people are looking at these cards, and what I discovered was absolutely zero people wanted to admit they acted like a victim. I mean, nobody. Well, I'm not a victim. I'm like, well, what about the job that you have? What about the person you're
Right.
living with? But I didn't say that, you know?
Yeah.
I was in scientist mode, so I just gathered my data and kept my mouth shut. So I was a little disappointed, quite honestly, because I thought I'd been given this great gift, and everybody's telling me no, they would never buy a deck of cards that was ego and self with a capital S. And a month or so later, I came back to my hometown. My mother was turning 70. We're having a party. And I showed her the cards, and she said, well, Stacy, this is really just your ego. And that changed everything because everybody has an ego. I mean, that's something, whether or not you've been to any type of post high school education or not, you've probably heard that in and around anything having to do with psychology. You know, even Freud was very big about the id, the ego, and the superego. So I changed the word from victim to ego. I ended up with 52 word pairs, and I created a deck of cards. And I was living in Florida at the time, as I said, and I started going around to metaphysical bookstores to see if I could get them to buy this deck of cards. And a couple of them did, but the one place ended up asking me if I would be willing to do readings. And I've always had that more intuitive, you know, when you're highly sensitive, you have that. Call it an empath, whatever word you want to use. So I was like, well, I've never done a card reading before, but hell, there's a lot of crap I've never done in life. I'll give it a shot. So I started doing readings at their shop. And what I learned from that was people don't go to a reading for personal evolution. They go to find out when their next man's coming, when the lottery ticket is going to pay off. They didn't want to hear what I had to say. You know, they didn't want to hear, you need to look in the mirror, because the mirror is your best friend. You know, and if you really want to know what's going on in your life, you need to go look in the mirror and ask yourself how you're participating in this relationship. Well, they didn't like that.
I love that. I do tarot readings too, and yeah, a lot of the times it comes up what they need to hear, not necessarily what they want to hear.
And they didn't, and I wasn't giving them any of like the chariot and the wheel and the jester. You know what I mean? Like I knew how to read the Rider deck, the Rider Waite deck, but you know, I was using my cards, and they were completely different. So after about 6 months of that, I was like, yeah, I need to be done with this, because this is not working. It doesn't feel good to me. You know, I'm not giving them what they're coming for. And what's the point in spending the energy? So by that point, I had sold a decent amount of decks, and people were like, I wish there was a guidebook. And that's how the book came to be. And it's funny, you know, that we're doing this interview and that it happened as fast as it did, because it didn't give me any time to think, which, you know, can sometimes not be a good thing for me, because it made me realize the 10th anniversary is next year.
Wow.
So this whole process with you has prompted me to become aware of that and to decide I'm going to do a second edition.
Love that. So the card's still happening, or is it just solely
I have
the book
not
now?
done the cards. You know, they are very expensive to produce.
Yeah.
It's not like, you know, with printing, you've got print on demand and digital printing and all kinds of things. You can do it as an ebook that people can buy for $4 or $5. And cards aren't like that.
Yeah.
You know, they have to be in a container, first of all. And, you know, I spent 20 years in the advertising world in New York City. So I'm a recovering perfectionist, but the drive to make it look nice and be appealing to people is still in me, you know, because we're attracted to pretty things. That's just the way it is. And, you know, so I wanted a clear plastic case, you know, where because the cards are purple on the non-face side. And, you know, and again, it's just, and then life happened. You know, and I ended up moving back to the town I grew up in. My mom wasn't doing great. I've become her caregiver over the 10 years since the book came out. And I guess, you know, life intervenes sometimes.
Yeah. So how can we tell the ego versus the true self? What's the overall message with this book?
Well,
How can we discern the difference?
At the end of the day, ego makes you feel either superior or inferior.
Mm-hmm.
That's the feeling. And something that is led by your spirit just makes you feel good. But it takes a lot of work, as I'm sure you know, to get to a point where you can even identify any of those three things, much less be in a place to recognize it and then pivot if necessary. You know, and that's part of the reason I ended up writing the book. You know, and it was so cool because I actually did a game too. I created a game board, and I facilitated the game in a couple of different rehabs, addiction rehabs. because I have pretty strong thoughts and feelings about the 12-step movement and how there can be other ways for people to alleviate their suffering around substances. And the man who ran the clinic was like, this is fabulous. Would you be willing to come in and facilitate an hour of playing this game? So we used the cards and the book and the whole 9 yards. And, it is evolution, because I consider myself to be only a link in the chain of evolution. My personal system is that's what we all are. Whether or not you want to own it and recognize it and do something about it is a choice. No judgment, For me, I really feel that. I feel that evolution is a lot more than opposable thumbs. And the human species is evolving. And you want to be on that train, fine. And if you don't, fine. But it takes a consistent practice in order to become aware enough of, well, what does it feel like when I feel superior? And you know what it feels like? When somebody cuts you off in traffic and you speed past them while they get stuck at a red light.
Mm-hmm.
That's
it's
that
kind of
feeling of superiority.
It's belittling someone, really.
Right. I'm better than you are. Ha ha. And when you feel inferior, which is usually what most of us are more familiar with. The doubt, the insecurity, the imposter syndrome, the I'm not good enough, all that kind of stuff. That's all coming from your ego.
Yeah.
So
when you talk about the true self, there's still going to be challenges, right? But it's a different feeling.
Absolutely. But you know what? And I'm not perfect at it. I'm not Thich Nhat Hanh. I'm not the Dalai Lama. I'm just a woman who is like, you know what? My life isn't perfect, but it's a hell of a lot better than it was 20 years ago. And I have some things that I believe are of value that I can share. And if it ends up being a tool you put in your kit, that's awesome. Yes, you're going to have trials and tribulations. I mean, Jesus Christ literally had trials and tribulations, the Buddha had trials and tribulations, Muhammad had trials and tribulations, the goddesses, if you're practicing Wiccan, or if you're more into indigenous spirituality, that they're always going to be people that you look up to or believe you can learn from that have trials and tribulations. It's just part of being alive. To me, the difference now is how I handle it.
Mm-hmm.
It's do I respond or do I react?
Yeah. And reaction's more the ego, isn't it?
It's the inability, and again, no judgment. I don't want anybody to feel like they're being judged. It is the inability to pause and ask yourself, are the words that are about to come out of my mouth, is the behavior I am about to do, is that something that is aligned with who I know myself to be? And, I still have times, because I love my mother with all of my heart. She's my mom. Mothers and daughters have issues. That is just the way it is, and I stop and ask myself when I get upset or I want to say something, to what end? To what end are you going to say this, or are you going to do this? But it has taken 10 years, Vanessa, for me to be able to train myself to do that. And it was the misery of the result. If I'm honest, that was the bigger motivator than wanting to experience a joyful relationship with my mother. It was, I didn't want to feel guilty. I didn't want to feel bad. I didn't want to make her cry. I didn't want to cause her pain. Those were the things that motivated me. And, it's funny because in the beginning, my mantra was just, shut up, Stacy. Shut up, Stacy. Because no good is going to come from this. And now, and it doesn't even happen all that often, but when it does,
I feel that.
And I ask myself, what's going to happen if you say this? What's going to happen if you do this? Is that something you want to deal with? Is that something you want to manage? And again, practice, and something I want to say that I think is really important, because again, with language, I think people conflate consistency and constancy, and the journey doesn't require it to be constant in order to make progress. It requires that you be consistent. And, constant's like every day. Well, if one time a week you sit down and journal and get to know another little piece of yourself, and you do that for 12 weeks, you've been consistent. And that's good enough. It doesn't have to be every single day, every minute, or every hour of every day. Because I believed it was for a long time. And I'm like, who signed me up for the accelerated program? Because I don't remember signing off on the tuition for this, But as long as you're consistent, that's what matters.
That's where burnout comes from, and that's where you get to a point where it's not joyful anymore, and it's not exciting, because you're kind of forcing yourself to do the work, right?
Exactly.
It's not coming from a place of wanting. Yeah.
It's coming from ego. Let me figure it out. Let me learn it. And then once I've learned it, I can cruise. No, that is not how that works at all. And in all honesty, I think the whole metaphysical new age movement at large has done a lot of damage to people in that regard, because that was the appearance that was being pushed. By certain new age publishers and certain new age teachers and stuff like that. I'm a huge fan of Caroline Myss. I don't know if you're familiar with her. She wrote The Anatomy of Spirit and Entering the Castle, which is about St. Teresa of Avila's story. And that woman can bitch slap your soul in a way I have never experienced. She does not pussyfoot around. She does not pull any punches. And you can either handle it or you can't. And she's not for everybody, But I found her to be so refreshing after reading and watching so many people who just kind of made it out to be like rainbow glitter and rose-petaled paths with a big bowl of ice cream at the end, because that's just not how it works.
I so feel that with people that get into crystals.
Mm-hmm.
And this was kind of me at the start, I guess, because the first thing I ever learnt, kind of similar to you, I came out of a shitty relationship, and the first thing I jumped into was a holistic healing 12-month program where we did herbs and crystals. And before that, I love crystals, but only because they're pretty, right?
Right.
And you start to then, put them in my hands, and so magical and whatever. And it's not until you realize that they're just a tool, and each one has its purpose and all that kind of gist of things, where you start shifting your mentality for things in the spiritual realm, that they're tools to use,
right,
instead of just pretty things and being on trend. And once you learn a thing, as you said, it's not just learning it once and everything's fixed.
Well, you didn't learn how to do algebra a month. There's always a more complicated problem, right? And if algebra can't fix it, then you're on to calculus. There's always something more difficult to learn. And the spiritual path is no different, because I think it's the Jesuits who have a saying, and I might not quote it exactly, so forgive me if I don't, but it's something along the lines of, give me a boy when he's 3, and at 7, I'll return to you a man. And the point of that is that the great majority of our beliefs are already formed by the time we're 7.
Yeah.
So, I've joked for a long time that, from 0 to 7, you get all the beliefs. From 7 until your 20s, you're just perpetuating them. You're recreating situations that confirm your beliefs. That's all you're doing. If you're lucky and fortunate and willing, by the time you hit your late 20s, early 30s, you will begin to unravel. But it is likely going to take you the rest of your life to get down to the core Because a belief that's formed when you're a child ends up taking on 100,000 different manifestations in different contexts and different environments. And you don't realize that your behavior in the context of a relationship is actually the same exact behavior in the context of a job, or the context of how you take care of your living space. And you have to unravel all that stuff. At least that's been my experience before you can get closer down to the root and begin to see that it all stems from that one belief that created one behavior that just sprouted like a rose garden into hundreds and hundreds of others.
Yeah, I agree. And it's learning, and then it's a life of unlearning.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
remembering who we really are, not who we've been taught to be.
Exactly. And not just, I don't want to I'm not blaming anybody, I mean, I think the majority of parents do the absolute best job they can with what they've got from where they are. And then you factor in society and cultural mores, and I mean, I'm dealing with it, and I'm sure it's probably similar in Australia, but I'm dealing with it here in the States because I'm going to be 59 in July. I'm not a kid. And so I don't know if you ever heard of the show All in the Family, which was on in the 70s. Archie Bunker was a bigot and a racist, but those words weren't used then. But this is what I watched on Sunday night for entertainment.
Yep.
So now that we have a movement of people saying, you know what, I don't know, I'm non-binary. I don't want to be called he or she. I have to wrestle with my own Archie Bunker, which is part of my ego because it's information and data that was input as I was a child, to not say, you know what, just go get your ears pierced and smoke a joint. That's what I did when I was your age. You know what I mean? And I have to, I own that, and I talk about it because we all have things like that.
Yep.
And the way around that is to be around people who are asking for your understanding and who are asking for you to perhaps change and be more open-minded. That's how you diminish your ego in that situation,
Yep.
and it has helped me tremendously to be around people who are trans, who are non-binary, who are pansexual. I follow a ton of people on TikTok in those categories because it educates me. And when someone is reaching out and saying, you're hurting me, we then have a choice. Are we still going to let our ego be in charge because it's what we're used to and it's what we grew up believing was the right thing? Or are we going to find a way to access our true selves?
I love that too. And it also comes down to when you say pause and step back, and before you start reacting, it's realizing that people's shit is their shit.
Right.
And what they're saying and doing has nothing to do with us. And if you're reacting to that, that is your ego, because you're not coming at it from a point of they're dealing with their stuff. I know you were talking about your mum, and I have the same issue, that it's her stuff, and I've got to the point now where I can step back and let her say all that stuff without affecting me, because I realize it's her issues she's working through, it's her journey, and I don't have to take it in and on. It's I can stop and answer.
Right.
If it continues, I do get to a point where it starts to niggle me, but then I realize you still can step back and say I'm niggled, and that's something I have to deal with. It has nothing to do with what's coming out of her mouth or what's happening in the world.
Well, and it's true stuff. For every relationship. I think the mother-daughter and father-son relationships, not that mothers and sons and daughters and fathers don't have stuff, but there's something particularly potent, I think, about the same gender parent-child relationships. And I saw Sadhguru do a little talk. I don't even know where he was, but he was talking about how allowing people to change how you feel inside is the ultimate slavery.
Yeah. It does. It happens with everyone you interact with.
Absolutely. And, that's a very intellectual statement, because to put that into practice is something else entirely. It's It requires a different level of dedication. And you also, I think it's important to understand that when, you say, well, I agree with that, and I don't want to let other people affect me that way, you better buckle up,
Yeah.
because the universe is going to send you thousands of opportunities.
And it does get to a point.
Right.
Yeah, it does get to a point where you do start reacting, but you're able to shift and know that that's your problem and it's nothing to do with that person.
But that's the process, and I think people are afraid of the process, but it's the same thing as when we were babies. You wouldn't expect yourself to go run 300 yards if you haven't even learned to stand up yet. It's just, and I know that's kind of a hackneyed analogy, but it's the truth. And when you're just starting out, or no matter where you are, because when I saw that video of him talking about that a couple of weeks ago, I texted myself the link and I put it on my calendar. I was going to watch it every day, and then I buckled my seatbelt because it's not my first rodeo, and I knew what was coming. And I have been given plenty of opportunities to decide. Because he says, you can do whatever you want. I'm like this. And
I love this message.
Yeah, I mean, that is like postdoc level.
Do you think too, being someone that's done this, that you start noticing to other people's reactions to then your reaction by not reacting? That they start to get annoyed that you're not reacting to them? Like I get that all the time, and then they start getting annoyed that you're not angry or you're not showing any emotion that they're trying to get out of you, and then that causes them to like go off the rails.
Absolutely, their ego wants to engage, and it wants to prove that they're either superior or inferior to you. That's the bottom line. So they're going to react, And the truth of the matter is that if you're no matter where you are, and your initial default, unless you've really done the work to be at a Dalai Lama Thich Nhat Hanh place, is you're just two trauma responses in the boxing ring. That's what's going on. Something's been reactivated in your nervous system, something's been reactivated in their nervous system, and you're duking it out in the ring. That's what's happening. And unless you're willing to look in the mirror, and something I suggest to people, and they look at me like I have 6 heads, take your favorite love song, go stand in the mirror and sing it to yourself. See if you can do that. My favorite song to do that with is called The Broken Road by Rascal Flatts. And it's, God bless the broken road that led me straight to you. And, those are the kind of little exercises that I find so incredibly useful, not perhaps in and of itself in the 3 minutes that you do it, but the consistency of doing that kind of stuff, it makes a difference. It changes everything.
I'm going to start doing that.
It's a really good one too. John Legend's song that he wrote for Chrissy Teigen. The one that's I love your perfect imperfections.
Oh, I love that song.
Your curves and all your edges. That's another one. Sing that to yourself.
I love that. My favorite love song is I Don't Want to Miss a Thing by Aerosmith.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's such a good life song too.
Yeah, I mean, love songs take on a whole different meaning when you pull the ego out of it.
Love that. I'm going to do that today.
Good.
Thank you. What do you mean by soul excavation? That you're a soul excavator?
It's all the stuff we've been talking about.
Yeah, just uncovering.
You got to dig. You got to dig. You got to peel. You got to be willing to go below the surface. You have to be willing to let go of the dirt that has covered your pain. And know that, trust that it won't last forever. And I understand, we all have different mental health situations. Some of us have experienced trauma, and it can be all over the board in terms of the intensity level. So I'm not saying, go do anything on your own. Obviously, this is not any kind of psychiatric or medical advice. But to me, being a soul excavator means, just like I said, what we've been talking about. You just go underneath the surface. You keep digging until you find that root that caused all those dysfunctional behaviors and dysfunctional thoughts and beliefs that have kept you from living your destiny and instead kept you in the fate zone.
Yeah. I think too, once you start, this is the type of women that I work with, that you get to a point on that journey where you're like, shit, this isn't actually what I want. Like, this is the whole thing that I do, is shifting people into alignment. Is you're living this life that you've brought up to believe that it's yours, it's your dream, but it's influenced by everyone else, not yourself. And then you get to a point where you're like, I'm not actually happy. Like, deep down, you might have all the things. You might have a beautiful family. You might have the beautiful house, the amazing career, but deep down, it's still soul sucking to you, because even though you love these things, it's not actually what your soul wants. It's not what's driving you in this life. And I think that's the point where people start to awaken and shift and go, nah, something needs to change. Something needs to happen. And that's when you're shifting into your path of your destiny, right?
Absolutely. And it can cause a dark night of the soul.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, when I was out of this relationship for the final time, it did. Suicide was an option. You know,
Yeah.
it was dark for me. And again, Caroline Myss has an audio of talking about Saint John of the Cross, who was the original, you know, in the Christian version of things, was the first person to experience a dark night of the soul, and what that means and how you can alchemize that. That it doesn't have to mean you remain in darkness forever. You know, that it could be that maybe it's just a part of your path. You know, and I look back at that time now and thank God. Because sometimes you need to feel completely broken before you can feel your wholeness. And not everybody has to go through that. I think that if you've experienced early trauma, it's almost a guarantee, as far as I'm concerned, if you really, really want to know who you are. But it's survivable. And I think that's the message that I want to convey to people. You know, it's nothing to be afraid of. Don't do it by yourself. You know, it's wonderful to have a strong inner sanctum and people who can help you, even if they just listen to you while you sit there and cry. You know, but it's survivable, and I would not be where I am, because when I came back here 10 years, it'll be 10 years at the end of May. I was here a couple of months, and I'm like, who stamped my passport to Africa? Because I am in the motherland of my insanity. And that realization was necessary. And the time I have spent here working on myself and on my relationship with my mother, all necessary for me to be doing what I'm doing now. Because that had to be healed.
Yeah.
I couldn't speak authentically unless I had done that.
So true. We do need to do the work. It's just it's your choice, right? You gotta choose to shift and to change.
Absolutely. And you know what? Like I said, consistency, not constancy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you know, someone like me who is, you know, pretty intelligent, who is a recovering perfectionist. I want to do it all now. Let's just get her done. You know, and that's just, I tried that for a long time before,
Yeah.
because I have a very high threshold for pain. Not bragging, just stating the facts. You know, been working on it, but it is what it is. And so I can take a lot of ups and downs before I'm like, because I had this really interesting thought crossed my mind the other day. I saw some TikTok video about Sisyphus, who was the Greek god who was basically sentenced to rolling a stone up a hill that he could never climb. And I said to myself, what the hell would have happened if Sisyphus would have taken that stone and gone to a different hill? You know, I think so many times and again, that's ego, right? So laser focused on the way it has to look, the way it needs to be, that we just keep rolling that stone up the hill and then it comes back down and we roll it back up and it comes back down. Well, why don't you just stand there, take a breath and pivot? See if there's another place you need to be climbing instead of where you are. And different views change everything.
Yeah, love that. I love the idea of having a goal, but only knowing the next step.
Oh, absolutely. I talk about that all the time. I mean, it's funny because I worked as a standardized patient at a medical school here. And, you know, portraying different patients with various medical and mental health conditions for medical students so that they could practice their communication skills and compassion and that kind of stuff. And one of the patients I always portrayed was for the behavioral change module. And it was all about goal setting. I'm like, yeah. See, I have an outline of where I would like to go versus goals. That's what works for me. Because I was taking my very first novel writing class back in 1996, and the instructor said, next week I need you to turn in an outline. And I was like the bereaved artist. I was like, but I'm a creative. I'm an artist. I don't want to do an outline. And she's like, that's great. If you want to pass this class, you're going to do an outline. And so I did because I wanted to pass the class. I mean, it was at NYU. It wasn't, some podunk kind of class. And what it taught me was the outline just keeps in your forefront of your consciousness where you thought you wanted to go. But there are 100 different ways to get there, but you don't know you're lost unless you have the outline.
Love that.
And so I don't do goals. I do outlines and next steps because there is no there.
Yeah.
Right?
And it's okay to change the there as well. Like it's okay to change your goal or your outline or whatever you want to call it.
Absolutely.
You can have a set goal and then get halfway there and go, I need to pivot a little bit and I want to go here now. That's fine.
And for me, growing up in the era that I did, the word goal does not contain that flexibility. If you've got a goal, you either achieve it or you don't. You're either a success or you're a failure. It's a very binary situation. So for me, and I've used the example, if I'm going from New York in the United States to Los Angeles and I have a way mapped out, but then I get somewhere and I see a sign for something that looks like the world's largest coffee pot, and I want to see what that looks like, I have the flexibility to go. And if while I'm looking at the world's largest coffee pot, I see a highway that's going to take me in the same direction, but not the same exact path, I then have the flexibility to do that because I have my outline. And now it's a conscious choice as opposed to it just being something that happens.
Yeah, so true. I feel that too. And I think sometimes when people have this idea that the goal has to stick, I think that's where everything becomes unraveled, because you might get to a point where you want to change, but you're like, oh, it's my goal. I have to hit that goal. And they might feel, that fear or that shame or guilt of not hitting the goal. But
absolutely,
that's why your life.
That word.
You can do whatever the F you want to do.
Exactly.
No one's telling you have to keep that. Yeah.
Because if you come from like the Tony Robbins school of success, or other people who are putting out that same kind of information, not succeeding in a goal is a failure. Mm-hmm. And that's where the shame comes from and the embarrassment and all that kind of stuff. And so, like I said, I don't even play in that world anymore because I was in the corporate world for 20 some years. And that is very much the mentality. I was in corporate advertising. I mean, that was the way everybody who was around me thought. I mean, I literally had to unbrainwash myself when I walked away from that job. Yeah. And I'll tell you, it's taken me as long to unbrainwash myself as it did to get brainwashed. That's not something that makes me happy, if I'm being honest. But, it's people don't realize how potent that stuff is.
Yeah. So true. Everything that surrounds us in our environment affects everything.
Everything.
And yeah, everything's a choice. Always go on about choosing. It's always a choice whether you want to expand your awareness or, shut it
Mhm.
down.
And
I don't
sometimes
think
you
people.
don't. And
Yeah.
sometimes, you know what? You just say, you know what? I need a glass of wine
Hmm.
because I can't handle it.
Yeah.
I'm just I'm done. I mean, it doesn't happen very often anymore, but there are times, especially after a long day that's involved multiple things, including running errands and dealing with drivers. And, because I joke all the time, it's all like kumbaya when I'm in my house by myself, right? But then you put me behind the wheel and I'm dealing with all of these trauma responses all around me of people using their egos because they have to feel like they're the best ones. And I'm just like, I'll try to listen to some birds chirping. And if that doesn't work, there are other means. It's not a default anymore. It's not something I rely on. But
Yeah.
sometimes it can just feel really overwhelming.
Yeah.
Life.
And that's still a choice to make yourself feel better. It's still
Absolutely.
a feel good thing. You're
Yep,
allowed to make yourself feel good, regardless of what that involves. Yeah,
exactly.
love that. So, is there any final tips for women on this journey, or any final words of advice you'd like to share with the
I
audience?
think I think it's worth it. Because who I am now and who I know myself to be, and I have my days. I mean, COVID, especially with COVID, right? I mean, there were days I'm like, yeah, I just need to be in bed with the covers over my head, sucking my thumb. Thank you. Have a nice day. And we're all entitled to days like that. Everybody's nervous system is different. Some people get overwhelmed more easily than others. It doesn't make anybody better or worse. It's just knowing who you are. And I think, one of the most important things is to start with getting to know your needs and what makes you feel good. And we didn't talk about this, and I hope it's okay that I am, but I've created a 10-minute self-care journal that allows you to do that. And I only did it because of how I saw it worked for me. A 10-minute check-in, you know and I have different things in it. One of the other things too is, and I think this is such a problem for women, and it's because you're younger than I am, and I'm going to guess your audience is probably in the range between our ages, but I especially for younger women, it's so important to know what the actual reading on your energy tank is.
Hmm.
Because I spent a lot of my life not knowing that and being the Energizer Bunny. And granted, my generation and maybe the one behind me were a little more societally conditioned to be that way. But I still think, if you're a perfectionist, you're a perfectionist. If you want things to be done the right way, you do. And, that's the kind of thing that can drive you to do things that reduces the amount of fuel in your tank without you realizing it. And I came to understand that a quarter of a tank felt like it was full because I was so used to running on fumes.
So true.
And, so I would say check in with yourself no matter how you do it, and consistency and a real desire to know who you are.
Love that. So, I always ask this at the end of our interviews. What's your message to the world? What is your deep wisdom that you want to share with everyone?
You're a link in the chain of evolution. And what you choose to do with that is your choice.
Love that. Well, thank you so much for being with us, Stacey.
Oh, well,
Sure the
I'm so
ladies
glad it
are gonna
worked
love
out. I
watching this.
really, really am. It's been
So,
delightful.
so fun. I love your energy too. You're such a joy to talk with. I love that.
Well, I appreciate everything you're doing. And I'm sure the women who are, actively involved in your Facebook group appreciate it too, because we all need all the support we can get.
You do, and I
We're
love
not meant to travel. There are pieces of the road you have to travel alone, but that's not all of them.
so true, and that's why I'm having all these events weekly, is to share everyone's different story, because everyone's different, and something that you say, something that another person says might resonate with someone different in different ways, and someone might get an aha from something you said earlier, someone might get an aha for something you said at the end, and it's all pieces that you want to take and you need to take from everyone's journey that do make up the tools in our toolkit, right? And it's so important to get what we need when we need it. So everyone's wisdom is welcome here, and I love building up this community of beautiful women connecting and building each other up. That's part of my journey, as well as to break down this overwhelming, I don't want to call it a fear, but this competitiveness between women. Like, there's not enough room for all of us, but there is. We all have different stories. Even if we have the same message, I resonated with a lot that you said today. We all share it in different ways. We all grow and experience life similarly, but we're all different. And I love that we're all building each other up with this community. I love it.
Yeah, well, because you don't get to where you are from one message. So you can't expect to change it with one message.
So true. Thank you so much. See you later.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you, dear souls, for joining me on this sacred journey. If you enjoyed this soul-nourishing experience, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and the little bell icon so you can stay connected and never miss a moment of our soulful exploration. Let's keep this transformative conversation going in the comments below. Share your insights, your dreams, and the magical moments you encounter. This is a community of like-minded souls, and your voice matters. If you're feeling called to dive even deeper into the realms of intuition and soulful living, remember that I'm here for you. Reach out to me through the links in the description. Let's embark on a personalized adventure to help you create the life of your dreams. This is Vanessa signing off from the Sacred Soul Shift series. Stay enchanted and keep shining bright.